And sorry, should I start that over again? Welcome and thank you for joining us. We know that this is going to be an enlightening and thought-provoking presentation, and it is being taped and will be shared with Zontans, hopefully around the world. And so just be aware that the camera is on you, right? Before we do anything else, I want to acknowledge that this presentation is coming to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the territory of the Mississauga. Oh, I did the territory of the Mississaugas of Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. This land is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and it is a treaty land under the Dish of One Spoon, which is a covenant between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee to share the land and its resources in peace and friendship. We acknowledge the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and honor their elders, past, present, and future. Now, Zonta International envisions a world in which no woman has to live with violence and fear. For more than 100 years, we've contributed to help achieve a world free of violence against women and girls through service and advocacy, in large part through our association with the United Nations, and Zonta International is an ECOSOC organization of the UN. Our ongoing advocacy is built around Zonta Says No to Violence campaign. It was launched in 2012, and the campaign has raised awareness of the global pandemic of women's rights violations and has united Zonta clubs worldwide in conducting impactful advocacy actions to fight violence against women and girls. We work to build a better world for women and girls. For the past several years, the Zonta Club of Toronto has presented a number of webinars pertaining to issues affecting women. Part of that is by informing, discussing, and talking about issues that some people may find uncomfortable. Our three guest speakers tonight were invited because of their expertise and deep knowledge in the fields of intimate partner violence, femicide, and the shelter system. As you will soon hear, they are articulate and passionate about advocating on behalf of women. As we listen tonight, I invite you to consider what each of us could do to amplify their important messages. Now I'm going to turn the rest of this meeting over to our moderator, Marjorie Gerard, who is Executive Director of the Don Valley Community Legal Services and a proud member, a longtime member of the Zonta Club of Toronto. Marjorie has received many awards and accolades for years spent representing underserved women in Toronto's East End, particularly in the immigrant community. Marjorie, that's over to you now.
Thank you. It's kind of strange for me to be called Marjorie Giard because my professional name is Marjorie Hiley. So bear with me if I seem to have a two-pronged presence here. We're very grateful to have this webinar today. And I just wanted to go over just a few of the sort of etiquette, if I could call it. I think we're all getting pretty good at this since COVID, but just so we understand, it's really important that you understand we are recording this, so it'll be available to be used at other functions. So keep that in mind, please. We all ask that you keep your microphones muted in order that we can hear our speakers without any other extraneous noise. That's always helpful. We are going to have the chat feature, which, as you know, is at the bottom of the screen. And we're asked that if you have questions, and I know if you're like me, when you hear somebody talking, some question will come right to your mind. Just write that question into the chat, and we will be sure that we get to it near the end of the presentation. So how we're going to deal with this is we're going to have each speaker have 15 minutes, and they can speak, they can show their share their screen and have a presentation, whatever they're comfortable with. We're fine with that. At the end of that, I will remind you about putting questions into the chat and that we will have that kind of activity at the end of all three speakers. So we'll go through each speaker. They'll each get 15 minutes. We have a good period of time at the end of the session in order for questions to be done. And most importantly, and I think this is really, really crucial, to discuss next steps, because it's wonderful to have this knowledge and that, but where are we going to move forward? And what do our three speakers see as a crucial next step from what they are doing in their community that we could look at to take back, whether it's to our individual Zonta clubs or it's to our other activities that we're involved with, to see how we can improve for the welfare of those that are caught up in this intimate partner violence and femicide. As Nita has said, Zonta, as a worldwide international organization, is very much in tune and a champion for women and children throughout the world. And certainly we have, with our Days Against Violence that we do every November, we have Zonta clubs throughout the world looking at these topics and seeing how we can improve in our own country, in our own city, with our own household, for making this situation not go away, at least have the resources and the solutions that we can work forward to. So with that in mind, I'm going to start with our first speaker, and this is Wendy DeSousa. Wendy is involved as the manager of the youth programs at METRAC Action on Violence. And it is a not-for-profit organization that advances safer communities for women and girls, two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and gender-diverse communities throughout Ontario. And it does it through research, education, and policy change. And Wendy comes to us with many years, I think over 17 years, if I have this correct, experience as a public educator and community mobilizer. And she has really worked with thousands of people, youth and others, throughout her career in order to foster individual transformation and system change. And enough of that from me. And now I'm going to turn it over to Wendy, and we're very, very grateful to have you with us.
Yes. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Marjorie, for your gracious introduction. And thank you so much to Zonta International, for Nita, for your incredible opening words, and all of you here who are devoted to advancing gender equity and ending gender-based violence against women and girls, particularly during this important time for the 16 days of activism. Really excited to be here and have the opportunity to share some knowledge and information around intimate partner violence. And as we come into this conversation today, I do want to acknowledge that I do stand on the shoulders of many ancestors, scholars, friends, colleagues, those with lived experiences, and many people that we've worked with who've shared their stories with me, who've informed the work that I do today. And I'm a part of a larger team that does this incredible work through METRAC Action on Violence. And as we open today, I do want to circle back. I appreciate Nita's opening words, acknowledging, right, as we all log in virtually, really acknowledging the land that we're on, but also looking at how do we ground ourselves in this important conversation, and recognizing that this history of acknowledging the land also means recognizing the ongoing impacts of colonization, and how are we committing to decolonizing our work to end gender-based violence and leveraging our power to uplift the voices of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit people, and the ongoing crisis that's impacting this community. So I just want to ground us in that as we enter today's conversation. And really excited to be here in the incredible work and legacy of METRAC, which was founded in 1984 to address violence against women and children, and using the intersections of education, advocacy, and prevention. So that's really where my work is rooted in, and supporting a youth program that was developed and funded originally over 20 years ago by the Canadian Women's Foundation, and since many other funders, to develop strategies to really engage younger populations in conversations about violence prevention. And in this work that I've been doing this for over 17 years, designing and delivering workshops in collaboration with communities, with youth, with experts, in various communities across Ontario to young people, every year, the age to engage gets younger and younger. And every year we're told, Miss, grade 9 is too late. Grade 8 is too late. And we've made it to where grade 5 is now too late to start having conversations about gender roles, gender identity, violence against women, because of the ongoing socialization of our children and the formation of these ideas, which then lead to enforcing rape culture and other dynamics that are harmful to women. So just wanting to share that that's the lens that I'm coming from, is grassroots, community-centered education, and really wanting to give an opportunity and an opening for us to just engage on what is intimate partner violence, who's most impacted, and what are the actions that we can take for resistance. Some of the larger pieces around systemic change, but also personal transformation, which will help shape and reshape our culture. So really thankful for folks to be here in this conversation with me. And I'm a visual person, so I love to share just some slides as an opportunity for us to really reflect on some of this content, but really wanting to have a conversation, right, about what is intimate partner violence, or IPV for short, and really looking at it as a pattern of physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or financial abuse by a current or a former partner. But beyond the acts of themselves, it's also about control. Right? It's a pattern of coercive behavior designed to dominate another person. And the government of Canada calls IPV a human rights violation. And that's exactly what it is. Whether the abuse is a bruise, a bank account that's been frozen, or a phone that's been tracked, the goal is always the same, and it's rooted in control. So let's remember that IPV doesn't only happen in heterosexual relationships, and it's not only limited to adults. So teens, elders, our two-spirit LGBTQIA plus partners, anyone can experience it. So our job is to recognize the signs, not the stereotypes. So let's talk a little bit about the trends, right? What are some of the current trends in intimate partner violence, particularly looking at the Toronto, Ontario, and Canadian context? And unfortunately, the numbers tell a very painful story. And between 2014 and 2022, police reported that IPV rose by 19% for women and girls, and 21% for men and boys. Women and girls still represent 78% of reported victims. And in Toronto alone, 2003 saw a 5% increase in IPV-related calls to police. So nearly 1 in 3 violent crimes reported in Ontario involves intimate partner violence. And those are just the reported cases, right? We really want to understand that many survivors never even call the police because of the fear, the stigma, the mistrust of institutions. So during the COVID-19 lockdowns, ongoing financial stress and isolation made things even worse. And we saw what advocates called a shadow pandemic of violence behind closed doors. So let's look at this question that's been coming since the COVID epidemic. Is intimate partner violence an epidemic, right? So let's ask those hard questions. And I want to state here today that yes, it is. And we must call it that. So when 11 million Canadians have experienced intimate partner violence since the age of 15, that's not an isolated event, it's systemic. And an epidemic means that it's actually widespread, it's recurrent, and it's deadly. And across Ontario, over 100 municipalities have already declared IPV an epidemic. And this isn't just a women's issue, it's a public health and human rights crisis that's affecting families and workplaces and communities. And naming it accurately is actually the first step towards mobilizing the necessary resources and the political will. So when we look at intimate partner violence, who is most vulnerable? Right? While anyone can experience violence at any time, right? Some groups are disproportionately impacted. And I wanted to highlight a few that I think are very important for us to really think about, right? How are we centering our services and resources to those who are most vulnerable, but also looking at the ways that we can ensure that our services and supports are culturally affirming, relevant, and in alignment with the groups that we're looking to serve. So we really want to look at women and girls, especially young women aged 15 to 24, are some of the most vulnerable demographics. And when we look at the intersections of identity, we can see that Indigenous women and girls who face rates of violence 3 to 4 times higher than non-Indigenous women. We see that the two-spirit LGBTQIA+ community, particularly trans and bisexual women as well, experience higher rates of violence. Women with disabilities who report abuse at almost double the rate of those without disabilities. We're looking now at newcomer women who face not only language barriers, but also isolation and immigration status that's been used as tools of control. So recognizing these intersectional realities, it really helps us design responses that are inclusive and equitable. Because equity is not just about special treatment, it's about targeted care. So when we look at these pieces, how do we see some of the cultural norms around us affecting intimate partner violence? And culture and history really shape how violence is understood and how it's addressed. And colonization and systemic racism have fractured Indigenous and racialized communities, creating these intergenerational trauma and mistrust in institutions. So when we look at the ways that rigid gender roles and patriarchal ideas now become normalized, right, we see how that normalizes control and silences survivors. And for newcomers, abusers may exploit language barriers or threaten immigration status. We've seen in the city of Brampton, finally the mayor has called out, right? What we're seeing is a huge exploitation, human trafficking, intimate partner violence, and domestic violence with newcomer women in the city, right? So we look at how some also faith or cultural frameworks limit the definition of abuse to only physical acts, leaving the parts around the emotional or financial abuse invisible. But culture can also be part of the solution, right? How can we also draw on the values of community, of care, and mutual respect so that we can help rebuild norms that make violence unacceptable and healing possible and a reality? So education, as someone, I am a bit biased as a community educator myself, but I do believe that education is the heartbeat of prevention. And when we teach young people about consent, about boundaries and healthy communication, we're actually interrupting the cycle of violence before it even starts. So early intervention in schools, we've seen the data on how it exponentially empowers youth to recognize red flags and build respectful relationships. We see how public awareness campaigns challenge the stereotypes and reduce stigma. We can see the data relevant around professional training that's equipping teachers and healthcare providers and first responders to identify and support victims safely in culturally affirming ways. And every conversation that you facilitate as a volunteer, every time you share a resource or you ask someone if they're safe, you're actually a part of the education continuum that continues to save lives. So let's look at a broader context, right? And think about what are some of the governments doing about intimate partner violence? And federally, Canada has launched the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence in 2022, which was a 10-year framework at the time to coordinate those efforts across jurisdictions. It grew out of the federal strategy called It's Time. Unfortunately, advocates like the Battered Women's Support Center warn that by 2027, these programs will face ongoing 80% funding cut. And without sustained investment, these plans really remain just promises. And in Ontario, we've seen such a strong municipal leadership, but really lagging the provincial response. Over 100 municipalities have already declared IPV as an epidemic, but the province has not. So government must match the community urgency with the policy action and the funding along with it. But we also want to introduce or talk very quickly about what Bill 173 is. And Bill 173 is the Intimate Partner Violence Epidemic Act 2024, which was introduced to require Ontario to officially recognize intimate partner violence as an epidemic. That bill, unfortunately, has since been retabled as Bill 55 for 2025 and is still in the legislative process. And as of today, Ontario has not made the declaration advocates are calling for. I welcome many of our legal experts in the space who may want to provide any updated information. But I think what we need to really look at here is the ongoing resistance, right? The historical lack of willingness to commit, to declare, and to allocate the necessary funds to create the changes. And declaring an epidemic wouldn't just end violence overnight, but it would unlock those necessary resources, mandate the coordination that's needed, and really signal to survivors that their lives matter. And until then, it's really on us as community leaders and advocates here in the space today to keep pressing for that ongoing change. So I just want to wrap up on a positive note to really think about what are the different ways that we really can work towards ending intimate partner violence. And we can act on 3 different levels, right? I always believe in that personal transformation, which starts as individual safety. So helping survivors create those safety plans, connect to supports, and trust their own voice, right? That's a big piece as women in themselves admitting, accepting, and acknowledging this reality and wanting to make the change despite all of the social barriers, right? So really supporting individual safety. Another big piece is community intervention, right? Be the bystander who steps up, challenge those sexist jokes, offer resources, believe survivors. What can you do in your everyday life, right? In your interpersonal relationships, or to work with other groups who are working with these individuals to really support, right? And challenge those cultural norms. And lastly, the systemic change, right? I know many of our favorites is looking at some of those broader ways that we can create change through investment in education, affordable housing, income supports, and accountability mechanisms that will support survivors, right? So as we wrap up today, I really want to emphasize the piece around when we combine our personal action, community responsibility, and policy change, we create a Canada where violence is not inevitable. It's actually unthinkable. And Zonta's 16 days of activism remind us, right, that change starts with courage. So ending intimate partner violence is not the work of others, but it's the work of all of us. And each conversation that you all spark, each policy that you support, each survivor you believe, every agency that you work alongside helps move us closer to safety and justice. So I invite you to stay connected with METRAC Action on Violence, learn about our React Youth program, and keep raising your voices in your communities. And together, we can turn awareness into action and compassion into change. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for your commitment to ending intimate partner violence in our lifetime. So thank you all so much. I've shared my contact information and I'll share here in the chat. And I'm excited to hear some questions and have some conversations throughout this webinar today. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Wendy. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. Your statistics are shocking. We should be aware of them, but that doesn't mean they're not shocking. And really, we have here is the issue of respect for one individual to another, which is really paramount. So, given us a lot to think about. I ask people, don't hesitate to put questions in the chat, all right? Because that way you've got it off your mind, and we will look at them near the end of the presentation. So moving forward, we have our next presenter. And Marissa, I'm really terrible at saying names, so I'm not even going to try to malign your last name, but I know you'll say it quite clearly for us. And Marissa is a very, very interesting person. She has a remarkable career overseas as well as in Canada. And she is the founder of the Aura Freedom International Organization, which has really developed over the last 12 years and is doing remarkable work. And she's really done a lot in regards to assisting those that have been victims of femicide and intimate partner violence. And indeed, as I understand, she was the initiator for the urgent call to action to have intimate partner violence declared an epidemic, which, as we've heard, a number of municipalities have done, but shocking, our province has not yet done. So she's going to speak to us on the topic of femicide. So on that note, I'm just pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. And as I introduce myself, I guess I'll ask for the slides if they can go up. If not, I can also share my own. I think it was either Lisa or someone were going to share them, but so nice to be here. I want to thank Zonta for the opportunity and thank everyone who's here joining me today. I want to thank Wendy for starting us off in such a beautiful way, such an important way. So Wendy, so honored to do this work alongside you, always, always and forever. My name is Marissa Kokkoros, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm the founder and executive director of Aura Freedom. If you can just put the view full screen, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about femicide, which Aura Freedom classifies as a Canadian emergency, as a national emergency. So I thank you all for being a part of this talk today. And you can go to the next slide then if you can. Want to make sure that it's working. All right, great. So a little bit about Aura Freedom. We are a grassroots women and survivor-led organization working in Toronto, more widely in Ontario, and even more widely Canada-wide. And we do also have some international projects to eradicate men's violence against women and human trafficking. And our focus is on eradication. And we really do focus and we really keep looking up. We look upstream. One of our mottos, or one of our, really our whole ethos is centered on Desmond Tutu's quote of, we need to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And that really is the basis of a lot of our work here. And when Wendy talked about education, all of our methods really to address and eradicate center around education. But we do address root causes. We work to dismantle oppressive systems that keep really that normalize violence against women and human trafficking, and work to excuse it and explain it away. And I believe that violence against women is the world's most normalized human rights abuse. And we're glad that our government thinks it's a human rights abuse as well. And we really do everything to one day see a world where every woman and girl can live free from violence. I just want to clarify that we did lead the urgent call to action to have our city of Toronto declare intimate partner violence an epidemic. That is true, but we're not the first organization to do that. That was based on the Renfrew County Inquest recommendations, and we were just following the recommendations there. So I do want to say that many organizations, including METRAC, supported our urgent call to action. They endorsed it, and we were all there at City Hall when Mayor Chow made the declaration, and it was a good day, but it means much more than a word, as we know. Next slide, please. A little bit of our impact there, but I think we'll move forward because I don't have too much time to talk about femicide, which is such a nuanced and critical topic. Yeah, this is an emergency. Every 2 days, a woman or a girl is killed violently in Canada by a man, and most often by a man that she should have been able to trust, a man that she shared a home with. most of the time. And femicide is the most extreme form of men's violence against women. It's the ultimate control of women and girls to dictate their fate and really to even dictate their death. And so we do frame femicide as an emergency when we are losing and being robbed of one woman or girl every 48 hours. Next slide, please. What is femicide? So Aura Freedom has done a lot of work in this space and working with the Femicide Observatory of Canada and also other organizations like OAIF. We do use the Femicide Observatory's definition, and it's the killing of a woman or girl because of their sex or gender, mostly by men, and driven by a need to maintain power and control. Misogyny is the biggest driver of femicide all around the world. Femicide, and in that light, that's why we view femicide as a hate crime. The hatred of women, which is misogyny, drives femicide around the world, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And it also drives violence against women. And the increase in violence against women and femicide that we're seeing is a result of a lot of anti-feminist and really anti-women movements that are gaining a lot of speed online. We can directly connect the dots directly from the manosphere and from the vilification of women online to an increase in violence against them. We must recognize the gender-related aspects of the murders of women and girls and how they are very different from the killings of men. It is true that more men are murdered every year than women are, but it's also true that most of the time, men are murdering both men and women are killed in a very different context. When men do murder each other in the context of crime or other reasoning, it's very, very rarely connected to intimate partner violence. It's very rarely connected to power and control, and very rarely connected to intimate or familiar relationships or inequality. And so we do have to recognize that femicide worldwide is recognized as a distinct form of killing. And we do believe it warrants its own label and its own examination, which is a large part of our work at Aura Freedom, is advocating for its inclusion, or at least its inclusion in the criminal code, or at least of its official recognition by Canada. So next slide, please. Thank you. It's not homicide. It's a form of murder that underscores the how and why women and girls are killed because of their sex or gender. It's rooted in inequality. It's rooted in the patriarchal systems that dictate all of our lives, even men and boys, from a very young age. And really those old entrenched beliefs, those archaic beliefs of the roles of women and men that are still around, it's really rooted there. Femicide is also so deeply connected to intimate partner and family violence, unlike when men are murdered, right? Which is rarely connected to that, as I mentioned before. And so it is not homicide, it is femicide. Next slide, please. Stranger danger, not really, right? Data shows that women and girls are most often killed by the men closest to them. These are husbands, these are boyfriends, these are fathers, these are brothers, these are sons, these are uncles, these are friends, and these are acquaintances, the men closest to us. And more often than not, men that we share a home with. So although femicide can and does happen at the hands of strangers, we also see that women and girls have most to fear from the men they know best. And isn't that the saddest thing you've ever heard? So from 2018 to 2022, almost 60% of women killed in Canada were killed by a man who they shared a current or former intimate relationship with, which was what Wendy was mentioning as well before, current or former. And another 22% of victims involved men who were family members. So in short, 4 out of every 5 women and girls were killed by a man that they should have been able to trust in Canada. Next slide, please. And this brings us to our most recent campaign. We launched in May as a kind of a soft launch, but we're having our big launch for the 16 Days of Activism. And that's Aura Freedom's Behind Closed Doors campaign. Because behind closed doors, what do we see in the movies? You see a woman running down the street, being chased, perhaps down a dark alley, getting inside her house, locking the door, and exhaling, I'm safe. In reality, women and girls are actually safer outside on the streets than they are behind the walls of their own home. And that's what Behind Closed Doors is all about. We want to open the door. We want to open the conversation on femicide in Canada. This is tough to talk about because we're talking about our family members here. We're talking about the men in our lives who use violence. We're talking about people that we're connected to either in a familial way or in an intimate way. We're talking about the men we share children with or the men who are our parents, perhaps. And so this is a really very difficult topic to discuss, and Behind Closed Doors is really looking to bring that into the light. So we have our pink door installation. You know, we'll gender everything except when it comes to femicide. We gender women's razor blades, and we pay more for hair care, and we'll gender everything except when it comes to murder. And so we are gendering using pink. That is intentional. It's not meant to be cheesy. It's meant to be intentional. And we're gendering femicide. And we are taking this campaign to City Hall. Our pink doors did go in front of City Hall in May. This time they're going inside City Hall for 6 days during the 16 days of activism. And we're also raising the flag on the roof of City Hall on November 21st. And you're all invited to join us in Toronto if you're there. And I'll talk about that later. So just a little bit about familial and intimate partner femicide there. Next slide, please. Children are really the unseen victims of femicide. The impacts of femicide on children are so profound and really just so often overlooked. Most victims of femicide are, mothers to at least one child, meaning countless children have lost their mothers as a result of femicide, and countless children, hundreds of children, lose their mothers every year in Canada as a result of femicide. Some of them witness the abuse, some of them even witness the femicides, and many of them also lose their fathers when we have a femicide suicide. And so sometimes children are also killed in the context of femicide, and we do have to talk about this very difficult topic. The youngest victims of femicide in Canada are less than a year old. So in addition to 850 women and girls killed in Canada from 2018 to 2022, another 138 victims were killed, and these included children who were murdered, often by their own fathers, so we call that filicide, as a way to punish mom for leaving, because there's no greater way to punish and to hurt a mother than to harm her children. And that is the level of misogyny. That is the level of power and control and showing her who's boss, even by killing your own children. Kira's law, Jennifer, Kira's mom, brought Kira's law into effect. And Kira was a little girl who was murdered by her father a few years back now. And Kira's law and training for family court judges is now obligatory and mandatory. We do want to see enforcement, however. So we do want to just take a moment for children and them as the unseen victims of femicide. Next slide, please. Look, femicide is 100% preventable. It is one of the most preventable forms of murder. Multiple risk factors can be identified before femicide occurs. Very often we have risk factors that are common throughout most cases of femicide, but we have lists and countless recommendations and inquiries and community brilliance and knowledge and research, academic research and grassroots research, which I believe are on the same level. But I do think that we have to talk about the preventability of femicide. There are multiple risk factors. There's many of them, but some of the most common ones are a recent separation, misogynistic and other extreme beliefs of the perpetrator. We find extremist beliefs in general, coercive controlling behaviors. And it's interesting because sometimes coercive controlling behaviors can be a better indicator of femicide than physical violence, because we do see women killed by their partners without ever having experienced physical violence beforehand. But coercive control, that was present. Threats to children, threats to harm pets or die by suicide, a history of violence, which is not always physical and not always reported, as Wendy also mentioned, access to firearms, stalking and tech-facilitated harassment, and strangulation, which increases femicide risk by up to 750%. A woman who is strangled by their partner is at some of the highest risk of femicide in Canada. Femicide is recognized worldwide as a distinct form of murder, and it warrants its own label because with it, we can have better prevention. If we can name it and understand it, then we can prevent it. Next slide, please. We can't speak about the killings and murders of women without speaking and honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Our Femicide Knowledge Hub was created in partnership with the Native Women's Resource Center of Toronto, who we've created multiple resources with. The murders of Indigenous women and girls are not only femicide, but a genocide, and they've been internationally recognized as such, including in Canada's own final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And we know this genocide was no accident. It's Canada's diplomatic genocide, right? It started with first contact, and it was meticulously planned through Canada's systems, from their, schools, quote unquote, and family separation and forced sterilization, child welfare system and apprehending children, and birth alerts, which still happen, by the way, over policing. And this genocide really is a huge part of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So we have to recognize MMIWG as genocide as well, not just a femicide. The important thing to recognize here is that missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls efforts to prevent, efforts to address, efforts to the 231 calls for justice must be Indigenous-led, community-led and Indigenous-led. So for non-Indigenous organizations, non-Indigenous advocates and allies, what we can do is stand back and amplify. We can amplify, we can share resources, we can invite Indigenous women and Indigenous changemakers to the table, amplify their voices. There's so much that we can do as grassroots organizations. We get to do a lot that perhaps national organizations don't get to do because we're not in anyone's pocket, I want to say. So we really like collaborating, and METRAC is great at this too. And, we're having an event on December 5th, along with METRAC, and we always have space and make space for Indigenous women and the organizations that we do this work with. So it should be part and parcel of any really event on violence against women in Canada. So next slide, can we call it femicide yet? So we can go into the questions later maybe, but there has been a lot of collective advocacy by feminist groups and organizations across Canada. Long before we even started speaking about the epidemic, long before long before this term really was being used in a regular way, just like human trafficking. This work has been going on for a long time. As of now, about 30 countries worldwide have recognized the term in their legislation, and we can look to those countries to support, our own implementation and study that. And there are studies on why it's so important and how recognizing femicide as a distinct crime can actually work to prevent it. In 2024, the House of Commons, so FEWO, the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, also known as FEWO, undertook a study on GBV and femicide. And Aura Freedom did submit a brief. There were briefs submitted by many organizations and expert witness testimony. And in 2025, Federal Justice Minister Sean Fraser said he was open to including femicide in the criminal code. He said that in an interview. And since we've written some open letters saying we still want to have this conversation, can we have this conversation? So I do believe that there is movement, but it's slow. It's not fast enough. It's not coordinated yet, but we're keeping the pressure on. So it's important for us as advocates to really keep the pressure on. Next slide, please. Can I just get a time check? I don't know how much time I have left. I don't mind if someone just shouts it out.
Yeah, about 3 minutes.
All right, we can do this. So femicide in the media, one of the ways Aura Freedom works in primary prevention, and that's before violence ever happens. So there's primary, just like in healthcare, before any symptoms occur. There's secondary, so that's at-risk populations or when perhaps there is risk of violence. And then there's tertiary prevention, which happens when violence has already happened. So that trauma has already ripped through that family. But on the front lines, perhaps we can prevent someone from returning to an abuser or a trafficker, or perhaps they experience violence, but we can prevent a femicide. So there's, primary, secondary, and tertiary. The way we frame and talk about violence against women in the media is a form of primary prevention. And we're currently bringing forth a project called GBV in the Media that was first funded by Wage and now being funded by our province of Ontario. And I just wanted to give you a couple examples. Next slide, please. On the importance of proper media, of voices, language, and framing. Some recent high-profile reporting of particularly violent and shocking cases of violence against women and femicide had people saying recently, what is going on in this world? These men are sick monsters. Only a madman could do that. It sounds like a horror movie and all these things. And of course, it does sound like a horror movie. And we have to remember that men's horrific violence against women, even at its most grim, is not unusual and it's not out of the ordinary. It happens every day in every community of every country to women and girls from all walks of life. So the men also, they're not out of the ordinary and they're not monsters. For the most part, they're not, eerie strangers lurking in a dark alley. They're husbands and boyfriends and fathers and teachers and coaches and brothers. As I mentioned before, women are at the highest risk of femicide by the hands of men that are closest to them. So just the way we're framing violence against women and femicide in the media is super important. Describing perpetrators as monsters or maniacs is misleading because men from all walks of life use violence with the women in their lives. Their fathers, teachers, cooks, taxi drivers, doctors, actors, athletes. The men who raped Giselle Pellicott were regular guys who had families and took their kids to soccer practice. And so we really have to reframe the way we talk about violence against women. The madman narrative also distracts from justice for survivors because it paints this false picture of perpetrators all being mentally ill, when we know that there are many women that also suffer from mental health issues, and we're not out here killing men at the same rates that they're killing us. And there are many men who are suffering from mental health issues and they don't use violence. And so much to talk about with the media, but I will breeze through the next slide because we don't have time. But if we could go to the slide that says GBV in the Media. There's some resources. If you go to gbvinthemedia.ca, you can get our guidelines, our journalist scorecard. We're working with journalists across Ontario right now. In their newsrooms, we're doing training. So it's a really exciting project. And if you work with any journalists, or if you are one, or if you work with anyone in media, please get in touch with us. Next slide, please. Explore our Femicide Knowledge Hub, please. It's an free online resource created with the Canadian Femicide Observatory and Native Women's Resource Center. It's aurafreedom.org/femicide. I do want to recognize OAITH and the Canadian Femicide Observatory that have been doing this work for a very long time, even longer, of course, than Aura Freedom. So I want to give them a shout out and give them and honor them in that way. And I guess we can go to the very last slide because I think I'm going to get a question of how can I help? So if we can just go to the last slide, I want to say thank you. Please get in touch. Discover Aura Freedom's work, our upstream primary and secondary prevention initiatives and training and education. I would love to know more about how we can all work together more. And this webinar is a perfect example of that. So thank you so much. I think I did it on time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marissa. I think one of the things that's come out of what you said and what hit me very strongly was how we need to improve the perception of the value of women, right? And it struck home to me when I was in the legislature just recently, commemorating the anniversary of when women were known to be persons, which happened on October the 18th, 1929 by the Privy Council. So that was for the common law things. So it's kind of shocking when you think of that, that it's that recent that we were considered persons by some legal experts. So is it no wonder that the value of women needs to be emphasized so greatly? So you've certainly brought that out, and we thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Again, put your questions into the chat box. I saw that there's some very good questions in there, and I really want you to do that so we can have that kind of discussion as well. And I will move on now to our third, last but not least, okay? Again, Grace, I'm just going to say your first name so that you can pronounce your last name properly. But Grace is with us, and she is someone who has done decades of work, working both in Africa and now here in Canada. She is a human services professional. She's done so much to advocate for marginalized women and youth, and indeed directed programs at the African Girls Empowerment Network, where she really helped again to bring up the value of widows, their needs, what needs to be done for pregnant teens, and against female genital mutilation, which, by the way, is part of our own criminal code. It came in 1998, as I found out as an immigration lawyer dealing with some of those cases. So on that note, I really look forward to Grace talking to us a little bit about from her role in the shelter system, as Grace is the Director of Housing and Shelter Services for Street Haven. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. Before I go on, can you all see my screen? Yes, okay, because I'm not the most techie person. I was just trying to ensure that I could share my screen. Thank you, Zonta. When one of our managers wanted me to come and speak about intimate partner violence, I was a little bit hesitant because I am one of the people who does the underground work and just want to see things change and not very front facing, but I know that it would come to a time when I have to put my voice out there. Like Marjorie said, my name is Grace Kolawole, and not gonna speak into IPV. I just want to appreciate it too much because I want to appreciate Wendy for the education piece and Marissa for the advocacy piece. We are the ones who kind of hold the women together until hope comes to light. So we are looking at people like Wendy to put out that education so that in 10 years and 15 years, IPV, GBV, and femicide would be a thing of the past, and the advocacy piece where we have our women protected in such a way that they do not see the shelter as a safe space and not their homes, because the shelter shouldn't be a safe space. It should be your home where you're supposed to be with your family. But this is where we found ourselves, and also being someone who checked the box. I was just speaking with one of my colleagues and I'm like, wow, talk about child bride, and Grace has experienced that, FGM experienced that, intimate partner violence experienced that. So I am speaking from not just a place of it is my job, it is a place of this is my life, this is what I have lived. And I am one of the lucky few who was able to step out of it and stretch my hands out to pull out other sisters from the mud. It has not been an easy journey. We have seen a lot of hiccups, challenges. We've seen a lot of frustrating situations, punching walls, but we continue to provide that temporary safe space for the women until they find their safe haven. I am going to go the other way around. I'm not going to speak into the work that we do. I would speak into our experience first, what we have seen at the front line, the experience of the women and how we have been able to understand their needs and how we have been able to tailor our services towards the support that we provide to them. Intimate partner violence is a driver of homelessness. We have seen different data, different research has been conducted, and it is just glaring that 25% of women who experience homelessness is experiencing homelessness because they're running away from their abusers. And being that it is unfair that a woman has to choose between staying with her children or staying alive. And the woman is put in a situation where she is overwhelmed with guilt because she feels, I am a coward. Because I cannot stay, I still cannot protect my children, but then I have to be alive to be a mother. The first point of call is to come to the shelter. And imagine that kind of woman reaching out to us in the shelter and there's no bed space. In Toronto alone, we turn away 40 women, over 40 women every night. Where do we think those women go back to? Their pimps? The abusive husbands? To the street? Or they go couch surfing somewhere where they might face another type of abuse? The recent SNA research that was done by the city or the province, it shows that in Toronto alone, we have over 3,000 women who are homeless, and we only have 1,500 beds available. So what happens to the other over 1,500 women? And this number does not account for the ones who remain in abusive relationship. It doesn't account for the ones who are caught surfing or are sleeping on the streets. These are just the ones who they could see and find and get those data from. So we are having over close to 2,000 women sleeping on the street because there is no shelter space for them to access. And that brings us to, if there's no shelter space, then transitional housing is a far cry. Recently, we had a meeting with some of the officials from the city of Toronto, and they were like, oh, we understand there's this, epidemic, and we are working hard to provide, housing and shelter for women. And I said, with due respect, co-ed shelter is not a woman's shelter. Some women cannot truly survive where there are men. They don't want a man to be their caseworkers. They don't want a man to be their chef. They don't want a man to be the cleaner. They want to be in a space with other women because of the experiences that they have faced in the past and the trauma they're dealing with in the present. So going on this table and speaking to the government and trying to say, we need more women mandated shelters where we find women serving women in that space so that we can create a room for them to heal so that they can go on their healing journey and move into independent living. But then it seems like a far cry. And then when we're talking about comprehensive support solutions, we're trying to talk about wraparound support services, but it's not available. You want a psychiatrist, there's a waiting list. And sometimes the women don't have that luxury. When we need the help, we need the help at that moment. But then there's a waiting game because of lack of resources that are available to us. And then the type of experiences we've seen and our study findings shows that women seeking shelter increasingly face complex trauma, mental health, and substance use. Some of the women, it's not that they want to use substance. It's just the only coping mechanism that they have. If the resources are limited, if I cannot find therapy because I don't have the income to access therapy, well, accessing substances on the street is way cheaper. That would help me at least temporarily elevate my pain and at least help me stay alive. But in the end, it is so easy for us to judge women when they start to use and they become very dependent on substances. But alas, it is the only way or the only resource that is available for them to be able to cope with your trauma. Shelters are overcrowded. I would believe that, like someone like me, I would want my own space. I don't want to share my room with another person. But the way it is now, you find shelters where you have 2, 3, 5 women in one room. But this is what we can do because of the lack of space. So there is overcrowding in shelter. And then let's talk about the intersectionality that Marissa and Wendy mentioned. You're a woman, you're either indigenous, you're Black, you're an immigrant, you're a refugee. So all of these intersectionalities further drive these women who are experiencing IPV into homelessness. Cultural responsive programming is very limited within our spaces, because at times, or most times, we serve women who want to see something that looks familiar. They want to see something that makes them feel grounded and makes them feel heard. And sometimes the way the processes and procedures are built, they're not culturally responsive. And this further drives the women into not trusting help or not trusting to want to seek help. And the kind of abuse we've seen that are women that have come into this space has faced is sexual abuse, social isolation, cyber stalking, emotional and psychological abuse. Financial abuse is the biggest piece, because the abuser knows that if you don't have money, you cannot leave. And because the woman cannot leave, it is only the shelter that offers us free space. And that is the only safe haven that the woman will reach out to. And then imagine Street Haven has 30 beds in one program, 47 beds in another program, and we have over 20 women coming to our door to ask for bed spaces that we cannot provide. So some of these are the unique experiences that the BIPOC women in our program has talked about related to IPV. They've talked about the immigration and legal vulnerability, manipulation, and them being threatened to be deported. Some of them come into this country with their spouses, and their spouses will tell them, I made you, I brought you here. If you don't do what I'm asking you to do, you're going to be deported. And that's further silences them because of the ignorance that they're not really exposed to the type of resources and help that is available out there for them. But then for the ones who are exposed, who know that there are resources available, the resources are very limited. And there's a distrust in the institutions, because you go to your doctor or you go to a social worker and you're telling them, this is what I'm going through. And this is something I also has experienced as a Black woman, where whatever I feel I've gone through was invalidated. Hence, that further shuts the women down to say, they're not going to believe me anyway if I say this is what I'm going through. So this further drives them away from wanting to be receptive of support. And also underrepresentation of services. We've had situations where we've serviced refugee women of African descent, and we realized that we had resources in place. I will talk about therapy, and they were refusing to access therapy. And we did a lot of education, and we still saw that these women still wouldn't access or go to the therapist on site to receive services. And we carried out a short needs assessment, and we realized that a number of them do not align with the type of therapeutic procedure that we were facilitating with them. So talking about refugee women, we've seen mental health is a stigma, because culturally, where African women come from or Black women come from, trauma means you're really crazy and you're walking on the streets. They don't know the difference in between. They don't have the skill set to name their emotions. It's just sad. They don't know what is anxiety. They don't know depression, because they have been clouded by religion. So it is like, I'm going to hand it over to the bigger being up there, and I'm going to hope he, solves the solution. And you have elder women telling younger women, this is what I've gone through. It's okay, because abuse have been normalized where they come from. So they look at the older women and say, if my grandmother went through this and my mother went through this, it's okay for me to go through this. So that acceptance of, because people before me has gone through abuse, it is okay for me to go through it, because that makes me a virtuous woman. And then for the unique experience we've seen with Indigenous women, I'm not going to speak too much into it because Marissa has delved into it a lot. We've seen overrepresentation in the sector for women who are homeless and underrepresentation of the staffing. We're not having enough Indigenous staff to actually, provide services to these women. And I talked about representation as a key factor of women accessing services. So we've seen there's lack of culturally safe space for our Indigenous women, and there's community disconnection and also systemic discrimination. These are some of the words and phrases most of our survivors have heard. I would not read everything. And some of the ones that resonates with me is you will never survive on your own. You are not allowed to talk to anyone. You're disgusting. You're stupid to walk or live without me. You're a bad mother, and I will take your children away from you. And the end goal of these phrases is to instill fear, to undermine the confidence and the independence and the ability for the victim to be able to walk away, to control their behavior and decisions, and so isolate the survivor. And I want to talk about the shifting client demographic. These are the evolving needs. We are seeing concurrent mental health issues in our women, the more dependency on substance use. We've seen that more older women are women who are aging in place and newcomers. They face economic abuse, social isolation, language barrier, and increasing shelter needs. And we've seen more women not trusting to go to the hospitals or to the police or to go to or to come and receive help because of distrust of the system. These are some of the barriers our women have faced. So there's a fear of systemic discrimination. There's a fear of losing their children. There's a fear of retaliation if I speak up. My partner might, put out my nude pictures out there. If I speak up, my partner might harm my mother or my sisters or my family members. If I speak up, I can no longer align with my community members because the community and systemic pressure is there. A lot of women get isolated because you're divorced. You become the black sheep. You become the one that they use as an example to say, you see, she doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have a crown over her head. And because they have been raised in that kind of community, they find it hard to dissociate from the abuser because they don't want to lose the crown over their head and they don't want to be used as the bad example in the community. And it's very, very scary that even for our women who have been able to move away from back home over to Canada, they still face this discrimination because they still want to belong, they still want the representation. And unfortunately, it is not all of the community members who move here that actually blends into the community because they also bring that myopic thinking from back home to say, if you move away from your spouse because you're being abused, you just want to be promiscuous, that's why you are moving away from your spouse. Hence, you see the women still staying in those abusive relationships. Some women cannot afford to be separated from their children. So when they come to the shelter, they stay for a little bit, they go back. Because then the abuser used the children as a weapon. They weaponize the children against the mother, and then the mother would have no choice but to go back into the abusive relationship. And I talked about spirituality and how is a driving force for IPV. So there's a spiritual manipulation where your pastor, imam will call you and be like, you're going to hell because you're divorced, right? Or if you leave your husband, the Bible says you're not supposed to, divorce, and it frowns against divorce. And all of the spiritual manipulation further drives the women away from accepting help, even when help is available, because they feel that if I leave my abuser, that means I am no longer religious and I will be termed like, the person who has strayed away from the path of God or whatever religion that they follow. There's the pressure and the fear of the divine consequence of going to hell. The impact of this on refugee women is the cultural and religious intersectionality barrier. This creates a strong barrier for them to seek help because the survivors may avoid mainstream services that do not respect or understand their spiritual frameworks and the fearing of judgment or cultural erasure. And we have seen that through this, there has been a continuous rise in need for cultural safe spiritual support for these women, where we do not isolate their spirituality, but we also bring therapy into their spirituality in such a way that they see something familiar and they're able to access help. And the government response, we've spoken about the government. Marissa spoke, and Wendy did talk about the government. The government's we're advocating, we are putting our voice out there. We are asking for more shelter spaces for women. At least give us, even though you're not giving us anything, give us shelter space. Recently, the city of Toronto announced a 10-year strategic plan to open up 10 shelters over the next 10 years. And Street Haven was appointed one of the agencies to provide services to a 60-bedded program in the Etobicoke region, which we're excited for. That is 60 more women out of the street. However, our hotel program that houses 47 women is going to be closing down in 2029. So that is us getting extra shelter, but then another one is closing down, so more women fear the risks of losing their safe spaces. There's continuous advocacy for more transitional housing and more housing, women-focused housing, and more advocacy towards the government not putting all agencies in one bucket, because sometimes there's a call for RFPs for supportive housing, and they put all of us in one bucket and say, oh, we can just make it co-ed and that's fine. We don't want co-ed spaces. We want a space where we have women serving women. Now to Street Haven and the kind of services that we provide. Street Haven has been providing services to women for over 60 years, and Street Haven is a women serving women agency. The uniqueness of Street Haven is that we don't only provide shelter and housing, we also provide addiction services and training services. So while the women are here in our program, finding safety, we don't provide just shelter, we provide housing support, intensive case management, therapeutic support. We have a psychiatrist that come on site to provide services to our women. Every week we have a general practitioner that comes on site to provide, general health support to our women. And we also have a psychotherapist on site that comes to provide therapy support to our women. What we've seen over time is that because we have those wraparound support service, we have been able to crush that waiting time for our women. Hence, our women are able to access help early enough. And then we see them moving into independent living, and with support from legal aid, they're able to gain custody of their children. Our training services is our bedrock, because that is a service that prepares them for independent living, to be able to sustain independent living, because then we provide them with the skill set, capacity building, we provide them with education, we provide them with some grounding skills for them to be able to source and get their own income and become independent. And we've seen a lot of our women, over 70% success rate of our women that have moved that are not come back into the shelter system, because we have taken our time to actually prepare them to sustain independent living. For addiction treatment, for our women who are very codependent on substance use, our addiction treatment center, we put our women in our program as first priority to go into that program, where we have a 3-month intensive treatment center where the women go, and it's abstinence-based center where they go and they start their healing journey from there. But what we have seen is that
We've got about 2 minutes now, Grace. Sorry, 2 minutes, please, dear.
Okay. All right. So what we have seen is that for our refugee women who were not able or are not able to access the contemporary psychotherapy services that we provide, we started a program called Afrocentric Spiritual Psychotherapy, which has been a transformative approach to get our refugee women to align and receive therapy. So this is uniquely grounded in healing. It also aligns with spirituality. And then we see a rise from 10%. We see a surge in our women receiving therapy to over 70%, because now they see Street Haven did hire a therapist of African descent to facilitate this therapy, both individual therapy and group therapy. And because our refugee women see somebody who looks like them, who knows about their spirituality, we see them now leaning towards accepting therapy, and then we see them being more grounded. We see them incorporating more into the community. We see them going to school, getting a job, and getting to move out of the shelter system and moving on with their life without coming back into the shelter system. This is our baby project. We are still working hard on this and creating processes and procedures, but we've recorded immense success rates in this program. And just wrapping up, message for all of us, I want to say healing begins when a woman is no longer silenced by fear, but empowered by true dignity and support. And one of our survivors said, I didn't just survive, I reclaimed every part of me they tried to erase. Healing isn't quiet, it's powerful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. You've really given us a lot of insight in a very short period of time, and it's hard to take it all in, to be quite honest. But speaking as someone who does community legal clinic work, I know one of the grave problems we have is when we deal with women with intimate partner violence, and even the priority programs that they have for affordable housing, you have to wait months and months and months before you can get a spot, which is just it strains credibility, and it strains their resources. So on that note, I know we're running a little bit behind times, but it's been really good to hear all this information. And I think this is the time now when we should start, just looking at some of the questions. And I think one of the things we see from the chat is that there's a lot of questions about what can we do to help. How can we support these people? How can we raise awareness? So I guess I'll start with Wendy. Can you see what we can do to reach that question, to make that question?
I'll take a look here, Marjorie. Thank you. But I felt Marissa was a bit prepared to answer one of the questions.
Okay. All right then.
So I'll pass to
Excellent.
Marissa and I'll take a look here.
Oh,
No
okay.
problem.
Okay, is there a question box that I should be looking at? Okay, I'll take the one that I was referencing in the chat. Thanks, Wendy. Lisa asked, how can we get the message out to all women about the very chilling risk factors? And that's the reasoning behind the epidemic declarations. When we declare something an epidemic, if the government declares something an epidemic, the idea is that they treat it as such, right? They treat it as an epidemic. So just like we knew, when COVID hit, we knew where to get shots, what to do, how to wash our hands, mask wearing, the whole thing. It was mainstreamed, it was everywhere, it was constant, it was relentless, and it was centered, right? And that's what we're asking for with violence against women, because this has been a pandemic for decades and decades and decades, and never treated in the same way. So I think that is because it's more than just a word. The epidemic declaration goes beyond, the word itself. It's then how you're addressing it. So I think if we were able to mainstream violence against women, frame it, and that public health framework, epidemic, endemic, whatever you want to call it. And this is coming from someone who led the urgent call to action to have it declared, because the declaration itself should trigger a coordinated response. So the answer to that is, how can we get the message out, is to mainstream it, just like any other epidemic, health epidemic is mainstreamed. Yeah. I didn't want to type all that, chat.
Thank you so much. Wendy, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I saw a question here around that I'd love to kind of address around the moving the Bill 55 forward.
Yes.
I think in just my own humble opinion and experience, I think it's important that we really pivot from collecting the signatures. We saw a lot of great outpour in terms of alliances and signatures coming together to really, how do we use our signatures to strategically apply that political pressure, sustain public visibility, and provide that undeniable evidence that this is the efficient, equitable, and necessary step for ending gender-based violence in Canada. And I think one way we can do that is really target key committees. So maybe moving beyond the minister and focusing on other standing committees, specifically justice, health, and potentially status of women committees. And, you know, from my humble knowledge, what I know is that these are often the committees that really study, amend, and ultimately like recommend the legislation. So I think, how do we really mobilize these, you know, over 100 signatures to request more of a formal briefing on Bill 55 and its direct alignment with existing federal or provincial GBV strategies? And my next piece I'd like to add, I think we've had this conversation before with Marissa and Grace and the panelists, is really looking at, how do we reframe the issue for politicians? So I know a lot of times in the sector, we're often looking to pull on the moral, you know, heartstrings and social cases for ending GBV. And although we know that's strong, I think we really have to build a strong political case that highlights the economic and systemic costs as well. So how do we also present data that shows how will Bill 55 and the work that we're doing to end gender-based violence, how does that actually lead and connect to reduced healthcare spending, increased workforce participation? How does it decrease individual reliance on social services? And this appeals, you know, we have to look at the mind of folks in power and what some of their priorities are, but it appeals to some of those fiscal conservatives and broadens the bill's political appeal beyond a social issue to a public health issue or an economic issue. So I think with that is really, how do we get those MPs, MPPs sponsoring Bill 55, giving them those talking points, as Marissa said, so there's clarity, there's steps, there's understanding on what needs to be done, where we're asking for, that really link the bill directly back to that national action plan to end gender-based violence. And I think the last piece, again, I am very biased. I am a community educator, and I do believe education is important. So for me, looking for a systemic, now coming to the micro and to community, Marjorie, what I would love to call to action is folks to really get involved. You know, getting involved in your local school board, right? And advocating that conversations around consent and gender-based violence are integrated into the school curriculum, working with community centers, or if you're a hockey mom, a soccer mom, right? How are you integrating these conversations and embedding them in the work that the school kids or the teams are doing, right? When we're volunteering and working with different agencies, how can we support or advocate for more educational opportunities or programming in my local school board, my local community? So I know oftentimes we're all focused on the systemic, which is so important and critical, but we often forget the power that each and every one of us hold to just share these conversations with friends, family, community, and advocating through our volunteer services. I know Zonta is an incredible network, really looking at, is there a program or a school that we can hone in or focus on? I know some of the great work they're doing to hone in and support a particular shelter or a particular women's agency. How can we do that, right? To really focus and support and concentrate our efforts to really advance educational opportunities, campaigns, galas, dinners, whatever that may look like. So I think really creating space to advance opportunities for awareness. And Aura Freedom has so many incredible resources that we can tap into. So we don't have to recreate the wheel. We don't have to be Canva design experts. You can literally go to aurafreedom.org and you can download the incredible, and I use it to train my staff, my teams to share in community as well, but tap in and use those resources as a part of a Zonta evening lunch, right? Where, hey, let's talk about it. Let's have conversations. Where can we share these resources? You know, who can benefit from this? And just really looking at that, I think really breaking down the silos and finding opportunities for us to collaborate in community. So just wanted to share that, a shameless plug for aurafreedom.org for their incredible resources.
Thanks,
That's
Wendy.
me, Marjorie.
Well, you certainly have given us a call to action here.
Thoughts.
Great. Grace, did you have anything you wanted to add to this point? I mean, there's so many things that you've been saying about your system.
Yeah, I would I was just amazed and just listening to Marjorie and Wendy speak, and it's just gonna be brief for me. It's we need more shelter. It's just straightforward. We need more spaces for our women to feel safe until
Yes.
the miracle happens. We don't know when it is going to happen. We don't know if it's 5 years, 10 years down the line, but the present need right now is to truly create that safe space while other agencies do the work of ensuring that our women would no longer need spaces like this, and they would be able to stay in the comfort of their home and not run away because they want to stay alive.
I know as a lawyer, it always bothered me. Why did the abusers get to stay and the innocents had to leave? You know, it really infuriated me so much. But Anita, did you have anything you wanted to add to this conversation?
Oh, Nita,
You
I think
gotta
unmute.
unmute yourself, Nita.
Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
That's okay.
And one of the things that, and I have a little bit of a wrap up here, but I would like to have some of us continue conversations about what we can do going forward. Like, you know, it's not necessarily a letter writing campaign to the premier or to the you know, like you say, Wendy, there are other parts of the government that might do that. But speaking from a Zonta point of view, you know, we have Zonta clubs across Canada. And I would like to see us be able to contribute to support the work of agencies like METRAC and Aura Freedom, just to put a little bit of whatever weight we have behind them and help out. Because if anybody, does anybody have any other questions before I continue on with the
I don't, but I wanted to provide a bit of an update on Bill 55/173, just because I think folks can maybe take a look after this.
Yeah.
Nothing has been declared, as we know, but recently in the legislature, you might have seen the debates, and the government of Ontario recently has recognized the endemic nature of intimate partner violence. So, and this is when we see the, violence against women, intimate partner violence, and gender-based violence being like politicized, right? And we see the partisan nature of what we're dealing with here. Bill 173/55 is calling on the government of Ontario to declare the epidemic province-wide. They started a whole study on that. Aura Freedom gave expert witness testimony on that, both verbally and in the form of a written brief, as well as other organizations. And there was a huge study they undertook a study to see whether they were going to declare this epidemic. And now that report is written based on that study, during the snap election, that bill dissolved and then became, Bill 55. So the report is done. They are going to be in closed sessions discussing the report and presenting the report. But recently, in the legislature, during debate, were speaking of the endemic nature of intimate partner violence. So they're not calling it an epidemic, they're calling it an endemic, and you can go and look at the differences and which one is. And again, here we're seeing the semantics, and we're seeing really the partisan nature of what we're dealing with here, as opposed to, across party lines. What we need is leaders across party lines to get together and address violence against women as the national emergency that it is, once and for all. And it's not happening. So you might be able to catch those YouTube videos and what was going on in the legislature, but they're recognizing something. So there is a bit of movement there, and there is a 1,000-page report coming out on that whole study that they undertook to see whether they were going to declare the epidemic. So I won't get into too much more because I know, Nita, you have a closing, but just to give folks a bit more info on what's going on with that. And you could, read and watch some videos if you're at all interested. But yeah.
I would, before I do a closing, I would just also like a plug for Aura Freedom. Go online, Google them, look up Aura Freedom, and ask to be subscribed to their newsletter. Because through that vehicle, Aura Freedom can keep us up to date on things that are happening, not just in the city, but with the governments and what's going on, with information that, as lay people, I'm going to call us, don't necessarily have. So the great resource for information and keeping up to date and for calls to action. So go online, look them up, and subscribe.
Thank you. That's very kind. And it's a collective effort. I'm sure there are many organizations doing this work, including METRAC and including Grayson on the front lines. So yeah, it's just wonderful to be in this space. And thanks, Zonta, again, for all of this, bringing us together. And in person, I want to say movements that gather in person, we've gotten away from that. And I know it's not always possible and not always, accessible, but the more movement, any social movement gathers in person, it really does gather that fuel, and the sisterhood builds, the siblinghood builds. And whenever we can do these things in person, again, we have an event on December 5th coming up. We have our flag raising. Coming out in person is always really good too for the movement and connecting and just building bridges and coordination. Yeah.
And Zonta Club of Toronto is very proudly participating in that December 5th. Wendy, take 2 seconds and tell them what we're doing on December 5th.
Awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Maybe I'll pull up our preliminary flyer here as a visual person. Maybe I'll just share my screen.
We at Zonta Toronto wanted to move out of our own particular silo and get out into the community and really work with an activity and be present.
Yes. And we're so proud and thankful for Zonta International and your support. As I'm pulling it up here, I'm fighting tech difficulties, but that is okay. I will share here the flyer that we have available. But just to speak briefly on December 6th for the National Day of Remembrance and Action to Stop Violence Against Women. I know we are a part of a collective that over 10 years now, many grassroots agencies have come together to really address, right, to commemorate this important day, a national holiday, but also to speak to the different ways that violence against women has been impacting our community, particularly looking at the lens in the way of how has it impacted vulnerable groups of women, particularly African, Caribbean, and Black women, Two-Spirit, LGBTQIA, trans, non-binary, also newcomer, disabled women, right, youth, racialized. So really looking at those intersections and speaking to what are the themes and how it's being impacted year by year. So I know Aura Freedom has also been one of the partners for many years. This event is almost, I think, 20 years annually taking place in the Regent Park community, and all grassroots led. Right. And this year, our theme is around honoring her memory, exploring human trafficking and violence prevention through digital awareness. We will circulate the flyer as well. And usually what it includes is over 150 local community residents attend the space, participate in a traditional opening led by the Toronto Council Fire and some of their incredible Indigenous elders and leaders, including Red Bear singers. We oftentimes have that traditional opening lead and that conversation to really ground us, right, in the reality of how this violence is also impacting murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit communities, and the ongoing impact of colonization and genocide. This year we'll be hosting, we're very gracious to have a keynote speaker from Aura Freedom, a panel discussion from some incredible leaders in the sector, a community dinner, and a community healing circle. So an opportunity to really think about how do we foster healing in our everyday life. So we look forward to having folks come out. We're back in person again after 3 years online through COVID. So we'll be in downtown Toronto, Dundas and Parliament in the Regent Park community. We invite you to come out to participate, enjoy a meal, have a conversation, connect with some folks. We're grateful to have Zonta International support this year at this event to ensure that these events carry on. And I really want to emphasize that with you all. I think it's so important that we really look at the reality of, we're living in economic challenges, inflation, shrinkflation, a housing crisis, a food crisis. And this is happening in Canada, right? So really looking at the ways that our sector is shrinking, and we are seeing it from the inside out, the shrinking and destabilization of funding. And we know that this is by design and purpose, right? So as sector is shrinking, agencies are closing down or restructuring, as they're calling it, who will meet the demand that is increasing? So we really look at grassroots agencies to come and donate and collaborate to make these events possible. And it's becoming harder and harder every year. So I think this is an outcry and an important moment for us to think about how do we mobilize and break the silos to work together and think and reimagine how we can do this work and really advocate that funds need to be invested. We need to have housing, as Grace said, it's period. There's no question about it. We need to advocate for housing, for food, for opportunities, and for this sector to be sustained in the years to come. So we will share the registration link. I think this, we had to update it. I saw the piece, Marissa. Thank you for sharing. I think we have to just update it. So I will send the updated flyer and correct registration link needed to you as well, and hopefully to those who registered and came out today. And you can support, come out in person, feel the energy of community, resisting and healing and moving towards action and liberation, but also to inspire us to keep the conversation going throughout the year, not just in the 16 days of activism or Gender Awareness Month, but really looking at how do we create sustainable change throughout the year, all year long, because I know Grace is seeing it day in and day out, that this is the reality within our communities. So just want to thank you all for your incredible support. And Nita, I can also share this with folks and let us know if you have any questions about the event. And as you can see, we're just partnered with over 10 incredible organizations who've made this possible.
I just wanted to point out that we did the committee did a lot of work on trying to decide what the focus of this event was going to be. And we felt that trafficking and violence through digital media was really important factor. And we found out, or I found out subsequently, just within the last 2 days, that is the theme that United Nations has chosen this year for the 16 days of activism. So this December 5th, it's the 5th we're doing it on, not the 6th, really what they've chosen as their focus is very timely. So anyway, I want to thank everybody. We heard a lot of information tonight. Some of it was new to some of us. Some of it was very disturbing, and it's a disturbing reminder of how much work we still have to do in our communities, nationally and internationally.
Oh, Nita, you're muted. You're muted, Nita.
Okay.
Okay, now we can.
Thank you. To reiterate, I said we've just heard a lot of information that some of it was new to some of us. Some of it was very disturbing. but it is a reminder of how much we still have to do in our communities nationally and internationally to combat intimate partner violence and femicide. Zonta International's mission is, and key reason right now, is to build a better world for women and girls, a world where no woman has to be afraid or live in fear. We need to spread the word, as we've heard tonight, we need to spread the word about IPV, that it is an epidemic, and we need to get femicide into the criminal code. We need to associate ourselves with organizations that are already working in the field, such as METRAC and Aura Freedom and many others. Their expertise is going to give us a roadmap forward on how clubs like Zonta's and others can work and help the movement. And quite frankly, we need to make noise. We need to make noise. We need to let our elected officials know that intimate partner violence needs to be declared an epidemic. We need to let them know that femicide needs to be in the criminal code. In conjunction with our allies, the Zonta Canada Caucus will probably be working to develop a plan that makes sense for all of us, whether that is a letter writing campaign or a march on the provincial and federal offices, or whatever form that takes. We are prepared to work and work hard to do whatever we can do to end intimate partner violence and femicide. I want to say thank you to Marissa, Wendy, and Grace, and Marjorie for your participation tonight. Your expertise and commitment and leadership are models for us all. You know, sometimes when I hear people like you talk, I wish, oh God, I wish that was me. I wish that was me that could get up there and do that. I want to also give a special shout out to Lisa Lumley, who is Zonta Club of Toronto's advocacy chair, and she has been the mover and shaker in putting on tonight's presentation. And to Laki Sarasinga, who is our, she's our awards chair, and she has been our technical wizard for tonight. So thank you all. Zontans and other people who may be here, remember to participate in 16 days of activism activities. Try and say that in your community and areas, and proudly wear your orange if you're out there. But we have to get out, show our faces, and participate. And the easiest way for you to do that is do things like go to Brampton City Hall, which they're when they do the light up. Go to Niagara Falls with the Zonta Clubs of St. Catharines and Niagara Falls, where they're lighting up Niagara Falls orange. All of our communities have something. I mean, we tried to get City Hall here, but unfortunately they're digging up the pathway or something. Anyway, participate in what's going on out there. Show your Zonta face, show your support, and go make a little noise. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.